Joining us now, Chief Secretary to the Treasury in the studio, as you can see, and that's Simon Clarke. Hi, good morning.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. What's the government going to do about it?
Well, we hope very much that ongoing talks between the employer and the unions will make progress today. And clearly, from our point of view, we want to see a resolution to this issue, but we obviously want to see a resolution that works for everybody, and that needs to work for rail workers, but critically it needs to work for passengers and the taxpayer as well. And that's what underpins this whole process. We need a railway which is both sustainable in terms of its costs, but also in terms of the service it provides to the public. And at the moment, we don't have that. The taxpayer supported the railway industry very substantially during the pandemic. We're now coming out of that. We need the railway to be, as I say, a sustainable force in our country. It isn't. Those changes need to be secured as part of this wider negotiation. So
what are you going to do to stop the strike?
Well, as I say, we continue to make sure that those talks have the support from government that they need. But ultimately, this is a matter between the employers, the train operating companies and Network Rail, and the trade unions. And the government doesn't sit directly as a part of those talks for a very good reason. We don't intervene in the specific process between an employer and the unions representing employees, but we are there to provide the support and the enabling framework for those talks to succeed.
But if you don't get involved, the country's going to grind to a halt for a week.
Well, ultimately, Kay, we don't control all the levers that need to be that need to be held here as the employer. The employer is Network Rail and the train operating companies. They are the ones who need to drive the programme of reform to make the railway sustainable. We don't own the railways ourselves, and it wouldn't be right for us to substitute ourselves for the role of the employer. We recognise these strikes are a huge inconvenience for millions of people. I absolutely want them not to go ahead, but it isn't the case that we can put ourselves into the hot seat in place of the legal employer.
No, you say you're not getting involved with the negotiations, but then you say something like this at the weekend. What we can't do is have unrealistic expectations around pay, which do in turn prolong and intensify this inflation problem, because we all want it to end, and the way it will end soonest is if we are sensible about pay. So you are getting involved.
Well, my comments there were in the context of the wider public sector pay review bodies process, which is taking place at the moment, which will determine pay for the people who the government does employ directly. That is to say, our teachers, our nurses, our police.
This doesn't apply to the rest.
Well, it sets an overall framework which is important for employers to understand, which is that obviously public sector pay discipline really matters here. We have an inflation problem in this country, as indeed is common across the Western world after the pandemic. If we don't want that problem to either intensify or prolong itself, then we need to be sensible around pay awards. If we give awards which are above inflation in this landscape, then we are in a really difficult place in terms of bringing down inflation, which in turn obviously is driving the cost of living.
But that's not what the RMT is asking for. They're asking for 7.1%, and inflation looks as though it'll be riding at something like 11%.
Well, the issue we need to secure for the railways is about making sure that you have a sustainable offer on pay, but also linked to productivity reform as well, because the railways are not run as efficiently as they could be. There are all sorts of practices there which are seriously outdated, which make the railways both more expensive to operate, but also less efficient in terms of their operation than they otherwise ought to be. And so there's a variety of things that need to change, whether that be in ticket offices or in terms of maintenance or in terms of different unions not really offering the smoothest possible service when it comes to how they operate, which do need to change if the taxpayer and the fare payer is to get the right deal.
So it's the right idea then for effectively rail workers to suffer a pay cut?
Well, in the current situation with inflation, which is a real issue, we do have to be very, very sensitive that if we start having pay awards which take us close to double digits, then we are going to see this problem prolonged, and that is just the economic reality of where we find ourselves at the moment. And
so is that a yes then?
Well, I'm not. As I say, I'm not the legal employer in this dispute, and so I'm not going to substitute myself for Network Rail or for the train operating companies. But we do absolutely need to have an understanding across the wider public sector that we cannot have inflation-busting pay increases, because that will, in turn, drive the problem we're trying to solve.
How likely do you think it is that strikes will go ahead?
I fear it is likely that they will go ahead. Clearly, we will continue to support the negotiations until such time as there's no more time to discuss. But I think the public do this week need to be aware there will be very substantial disruption, and it is therefore sensible to make preparations for that.
Now, you want to tell us a little bit about a cost of living calculator which will reflect the national insurance and how people will be saving money or otherwise. But at the weekend, we saw thousands of people coming to central London to demonstrate about the cost of living crisis. Is this government tone deaf when it comes to what's happening? No,
absolutely not. I mean, we are very confident that the £37 billion package of support that we've put in place, much of which, of course, is yet to kick in because it will be paid into people's bank accounts throughout the course of the summer and the autumn ahead, will very substantially help with the cost of living pressures that families are facing. And it's worth £1,200 for roughly 1 in 3 UK homes. For most families, it's worth at least £550 this year. It is something which is there to help people. Look, the trade union movement, who are not, it must be said, normally massive supporters of Conservative governments, will take...
Word, though, the trade union
No, it's most certainly...
representing all of these people.
It's most certainly not, but it is fair to say that I don't think this can be taken as a snapshot of mainstream Britain. This is the TUC on a march. That is a very different group of people to the wider public. We all recognise that there are real challenges at the moment, but it is this government working to try and make sure that we come out of the pandemic, that we grow the economy and that we manage the public finances responsibly.
But the TUC is representing lots of trade union members, of course, and it does look as though, from reading the papers this morning, that more and more of those trade unions will be balloting their members to go on strike. It looks as though we are heading towards a summer of discontent.
Well, look, we have to see what happens with the individual unions. What I'd emphasise is there is a pay review body process that's in place across government. That's independent of government, so there are independent groups of experts who recommend pay awards, and it's then for individual government departments to respond to those for the workforces concerned. But those bodies are reporting throughout the course of June, and then government departments will set out their response in due course. From what I understand, and it is early days, those awards are coming in at a sensible level, which is great. It does mean that there will be good pay offers, I think, on the table for public sector workforces. It's important that we wait and see what those awards are, and then obviously it will be for individual workforces and the trade unions to respond. But I do think people have to recognise, if we're going to forestall the evil of inflation, and inflation destroys savings, it destroys growth, it damages any economy where it gets an endemic grip, then we are going to have to show collective, society-wide responsibility. And I think that's a message which people watching this programme will understand.
It's difficult for people who are struggling to make ends meet as it is, and they look as though they are realistically going to have a pay cut given what's happening with inflation. So they are going to exercise their democratic right, potentially, to go on strike. And as a result, you may well find yourselves with a summer of discontent.
Well, we'll cross...
Do you acknowledge that that's a possibility?
No, what I would say is I recognise that there is sacrifice involved in this situation. We've put in place a £37 billion package of support to help address it. I'm not going to preempt what the results of individual pay review body processes will be or how the trade unions will respond. As I say, all I can do is emphasise the government is trying in good faith to manage what is a very difficult balancing act between making sure that people get the pay awards that they deserve, and our public sector workers genuinely do the most fantastic job. But this has to be set against the wider responsibility the government has, to the public finances to make sure they are sustainable. We're spending £83 billion this year on our debt interest payments after COVID. We cannot afford to get into a situation where we lose control of the public finances and in turn all suffer.
Unions are disagreeing there, aren't they? And they're saying, we're going to ballot our members unless we get a realistic pay rise.
With great respect to the trade union leaders, they obviously don't come at this from the point of view of a Conservative government. We have a mandate from the British public to manage the national finances sensibly. That's always, in the end, what a Conservative government is there to do. It is vitally important that as we come out of this incredibly difficult situation where we are facing the twin headwinds of what's happened with COVID and now, of course, war in Europe, that we do strike the right balance here.
And when you're talking about public sector pay, are you suggesting, given that you're suggesting that potentially there will be reasonable pay offers, they will match inflation?
I'm not going to preempt the results of the individual pay review bodies, but I think it is unlikely that they will match the headline rate of inflation at the rates we're now seeing. But that is precisely the point I'm making, that if we try and match or exceed inflation, if we end up in a cycle where everyone starts targeting the levels that we're seeing now, 9–10%, that is going to be totally unsustainable.
Public sector workers have to prepare for a pay cut.
Well, I think the private sector as well will go through this, Kay. I think the point is very, very few people are going to be getting pay offers which are in double figures. And I think it would be highly unsustainable if they were to do so.
Talk to me about airport chaos, because it is absolutely chaotic at the moment at many of our airports. Is Brexit to blame?
No, I think what we're seeing here is the result of the airline industry having obviously massively contracted during the pandemic, and now it's facing this surge of pent-up demand as things stand back up. And truth be told, it isn't resourced and manned for that challenge. That's why I think it is sensible that what we're starting to see now is some of the airports revising their schedules for the summer season ahead, because frankly, we can't have a repeat of the scenes that we've been having at some of our airports over recent weeks. And I know the Transport Secretary and ministers there have been working very closely with the airline industry to try and get it into a more sensible place, because they are, at the moment, offering flights they simply can't honour, and that is terrible for passengers.
Absolutely mental at some of these airports at the moment. I mean, the chief exec of Ryanair says is blaming the chaos on inflexible post-Brexit labour market, and the CEO of Wizz Air saying the UK's post-Brexit immigration policy is putting a lot of strain on the labour market. So they say it's Brexit's.
Well, I mean, ultimately, I think the British people made their views very clear on unlimited immigration from the EU, and there were very good reasons why we voted to have a controlled immigration policy.
Is this the result?
But I do not accept that this is simply a direct pass-through effect from Brexit. What I would say is this is the result of an industry which massively slimmed down, and understandably so, at a time when flying was well nigh impossible for a year and a half, 2 years. It's now massively expanded its operations, and the pressure is enormous, and it hasn't managed to align the two. We will do our part as government to try and make sure that our side of things is right, from issues like passports to border control, and obviously, we're pouring resource into this, and we're making sure that the whole processes are as robust as they can be. But in turn, the airlines need to do their part of things, and that make sure that the flights that they're actually offering can indeed be honoured, and that's the key thing.
What does pouring resource mean?
It means that we're making sure that all of these departments, whether that be the Border Force or the Passport Office, have the resources they need to manage this. And as part of the spending review we conducted last October, we obviously made sure that all of our Home Office infrastructure has the funding it needs to do the job.
What do you want to say to people who are waiting at home, who could be one of those 500,000 people that are waiting for their passports?
Well, we all recognise the frustrations that go with waiting for a passport and the pressure that comes if there's a holiday imminent. What I can say is that the government is working flat out to make sure that people get those in a timely fashion. And as I understand it, the waiting times are coming down, which is really positive, and that's something we'll continue to prioritise.
We're out of time, sadly. It's good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Thank you as always.